Hi, I'm Innova Team Captain Nate Sexton, and we're continuing our Learn Disc Golf series with the basics of putting. I'm going to get started by talking about the two main stances that players will use when putting in disc golf. They are the straddle and the stagger. A straddle is done with both feet sort of equidistant from the basket. One of them, of course, has to be behind your mark, and the other can be no closer to the basket. So I couldn't stand closer to the basket with this leg, but I can move around freely as wide as I would like in any direction as long as I'm outside that arc that matches the distance from your mini to the basket. So with this stance, you're gonna have that wide base. You're not gonna have a lot of forward energy coming from your legs, and you're gonna be able to kind of sit down into your stance and push with the legs as you putt the disc forward. With a stagger stance, it's a little bit different. For that, I'm gonna always put my dominant foot at the mark, and my off leg, my left leg, is gonna be back behind. Here you do get some forward push from the legs. Generally, you'll have a lower trajectory for the putt, a little more forward power, because you can load into that back leg and then push forward as you putt, lifting that back leg to give you that counterbalance so that you're not falling forward. If you're not familiar with that rule, we can quickly talk about that. A falling putt is not legal in disc golf, and that is only in effect when you're within 10 meters of the basket, roughly 32 feet, 10 inches, I think. If you're in closer than that, after you release your putt, you have to display balance. You're not allowed to push off and just go walking right through to the basket. So that would be a violation. So just to keep that in mind. So that's why you're gonna see a lot of players picking up the back leg to allow themselves to have a counterweight to bring them back behind their mini and have a legal putt when they're in close. So those are the two main stances. Again, the straddle and the stagger. I like to use both depending where I am on the course, depending on slopes, depending on obstacles, trees, things like that. But lately, or for the bulk of my career, I've been primarily a straddle putter, all things being equal, where I have a wide open putt with no other parameters that are gonna force me into a different stance. All right, I'd also like to talk a little bit about grip on putters. Step one, find a putter that just feels good in your hand. It'll be easier if you like the way it interfaces with your hand. They're all different sizes, so find one you like. I think a really important part for me is that you have some interface with the flight plate of the disc. So there's a pinch here for me between my thumb and my middle finger where I'm engaging the plate and getting some traction there where I can spin the disc forward from that place and not get so hung up on the rim, which can cause a lot of wobble and can also kick the tail of the disc up and cause you to miss low a lot. So I think that's important to get that pinch point, to get a nice clean release, find something comfortable in your hand, pinch there, and make sure that your wrist can freely open up and the putter can come out of there as cleanly as possible. When I'm putting from a stagger stance, obviously I'm gonna use that back leg a little bit more than I use the front leg. I use this when the putt is low ceiling or headwind because I want a little more direct line to the basket, and you can feel that backwards and forwards energy a little bit more to get a little bit more forward energy into the putter by using that back leg. So all the breathing and stuff is the same. Gonna draw the disc back as I load the back leg specifically, and then push off to the basket. For me, this putt is a little bit lower and a little bit more driven, so better for getting under a low branch or cutting through a headwind. And that is mostly when I use it, when I need a little more power and a little more forward energy. Cut that one on the putt. Okay, so now that we have talked a little bit about the two main stances you can use in putting, now I want to talk about the two methods you can deliver the putter to the basket with. And what I'm talking about is the push putt versus the spin putt. The main difference here for me is about how the wrist moves to get spin into the disc. With a push putt, you're gonna see a little bit of a lower drawback, and there's gonna be some element of upward wrist flick in the putt where you're kind of going sproing and giving it a little spin this way, where there's motion in the wrist in this plane. And that's gonna give the putt loft, and generally it's gonna be a little bit slower through the air, which can be a good thing because you don't blast past, but in heavy wind can be a bad thing because it's hard to fight through that. So they both have their advantages. The spin putt is delivered completely in this plane, so there's no up motion in the wrist in a true spin putt, in my opinion. So this is gonna be a much flatter drawback into the body and a coiled wrist, uncoiling into a nice straight spin putt. That's gonna have much more power, gonna be lower and faster. I would recommend learning both of these styles. As I said, they both have their advantages and disadvantages, but I think they're both really useful. So for a push putt, I've kind of already showed you that. That's what I was primarily doing in the previous segment, dropping down low, pushing the disc forward. But a spin putt, I normally would not do from quite this close, but it can work. In a heavy headwind, I might. So from here, instead of dropping down near my thigh, now I'm going kind of into the belly button. And I'm gonna go straight back and straight forward to try and get that thing driven at the basket, low and fast. And I'll use this much more from distance and in heavy wind. All right, so we've talked a lot about putting form and putting technique when we're in close, inside that 10-meter circle. But believe it or not, even I sometimes find myself out here 15 meters, 45 feet away, and I've got to do something a little bit different when I'm this far away from the basket to have a chance to get enough energy behind the putt to make it. So most players are going to go to what's called a jump putt from this range. What that means, it's actually a really bad name. It should be called a putt jump, because you can't be off the ground, right? So it's backwards. You're going to use your legs to push the disc a little more, and you're allowed now to follow through. You still need to have that point of contact behind your mark at the instance of release. That's the important part, right when that thing leaves your hand. That's why I think it should be called a putt jump in terms of the order in which things are supposed to happen. But what's done here, it's very similar, except now I have the freedom to push harder with my legs because I can allow myself to be caught on the far side of the mark. Same thing with the stagger stance. I can push so hard with this back leg that I can follow through and take some of that energy forward with me. And that's gonna let me put a little bit more energy and a little bit more height behind the putt to try to connect from way back. So like I said, about 45 feet. So I'll try to be a bit more forceful from this range and follow through. There we go. Okay, so from 45 feet with that push putt, like I said, that's kind of the edge of my range to make that shot. That's probably worse than a 50-50 proposition for me from 45 feet. Now we're all the way back to 60 feet. This is when the spin putt really comes into play for me. And nobody makes a high percentage of these, but your goal should be to get it into kind of a credible airspace that could go in, right? You want to just be floating past the basket as often as possible and see how many you can make. So while you might be lucky to hit even just one of these per round, you want to be in that space where you can at least deliver a putt that could strike gold from this kind of range. So for me, I'm switching now to the dart for a little bit quicker airspeed and a little bit flatter flight, less hook than my Fireflies that I use for closer putts. So this is a quicker disc through the air, better for me from distance. So I'm gonna go with stagger stance here and spin delivery to really allow me to putt the disc a long way. Again, this about 60 feet. There it is. Nice. All right, so that concludes my basic tips for putting. We talked a little bit about grip, we talked a little bit about stance and putting style, along with some different things you can do from different ranges. If you want to get a little bit more in depth, we made a video about how to approach different wind conditions, and you can check that out right here. Thanks again for watching, and good luck out on the course.